Hello, and welcome to Train Signal. This is video number 6, Administering Linux Users and Groups. This is part of Fast Track CBT Video, Linux Networking and Administration. So here's our table of contents for this video. In this video, first we're going to talk about Linux Plus Objective 2.20, where they cover Linux users and groups. In that objective, they specifically say that you should be able to create, modify, and delete Linux user accounts, create, modify, and delete Linux group accounts, understand etc password and etc group, use CLI utilities like user add, group add, user mod, group mod, change group, quota, change own, and change mod, and then perform similar tasks using GUI tools. So with that, let's go into editing users. Alright, so first off, let's talk about etc password. What is etc password? Well, etc password is called etc password because it used to be where the passwords for all users were stored. So it was where usernames, user IDs, group IDs, the default shell, the default home directory, and the user's password were all stored. And it was readable by all users, but the password was in an encrypted form. Well, later people found that encryption, that the password was encrypted with, wasn't very strong. And if a regular user could get a login to the system, they could read the etc password file, they could get the encrypted form of the root user's password, they could take some time and they could crack that password and then log in as root. So what they did to Linux and other Unix systems is they moved the passwords out into a separate file that was not readable by standard users, regular users. And that file is called etc shadow. It's where the shadow passwords are stored, or really where encrypted passwords are stored. But it's not readable by all users. So in the password file now, you'll see a little character that just represents what the password used to be, and it points it over to the etc shadow file. Then there's the group file. What is etc group? Well, group is a list of all the user groups on the system and any members of that group that are secondary members. In etc password, it actually lists your primary group. So all the users and all the groups have group numbers. So say there's a group 500. In etc password, it would say your primary group is 500. But in the etc group file, it would list group 500 with its name, but it wouldn't say anything about you being a member, unless you were a member of some other group, and then you were also a member of group 500, and then they would put you in there. So your primary group is listed in etc password, any secondary group membership is listed in etc group, and then all group definitions are listed in etc group. So programs user add and user mod are used to add users and modify users. These programs add to or modify the etc password file because that's where user definitions are stored. And we'll take a look at etc password here in just a minute. Programs group add and group mod add to and modify the etc group file. So you add a new group with group add, you modify a group, an existing group, with group mod. Now, a user being a membership of a group is actually done with user mod. So it's actually the user that you're modifying to be a member of a certain group. So some other programs we need to know are change own. That's change ownership of a file. We already looked at that actually, but I want to bring it up again because it's important. Change group ownership of a file. And change mod, change the permissions of a file. A couple other programs you should know are user delete or userdel and group delete, groupdel. These can be used to delete users and groups. Of course, GUI tools can be used to do all the things listed in here. So if you want to change the permissions on a file, or change ownership, or add a new group, or add a new user, or modify an existing user, you can do all those things with GUI tools. So what we'll do in the demonstration and scenario portion of this video is we'll go through all these things with an exercise that I've created for us to practice and see exactly how these commands work. So with that, let's go on to talk about disk quotas. Before we get to our scenario and our practice of adding and modifying users and groups, I want to talk about disk quotas. A disk quota is used to prevent users from using too much hard disk space. So it's a number that the administrator sets, and he says this person can't use more than 100 megabytes or whatever quota you set of hard drive space. Linux has a very nice quota system for controlling this. It's very configurable. It has a lot of features. It's not enabled or configured by default. It's something you have to go in and configure. Here are some important quota commands that you should be familiar with. First off, there's the quota command. Quota displays your quota in current level. So if I just type quota, if the quota system is enabled and turned on, it's going to tell me I have used so much of my quota. The quota on, so this can be used, this can be used by any user to check their quota. How much of their disk quota have they used? This program here, quota on, is used to enable quotas. It would be done by the admin. And then you would disable quotas with quota off. Another program is warn quota. Warn quota emails users who are over their quota. So this would be periodically done by the admin to tell users, hey, the quota was 100 megabytes and you've got 120. There's quota check. Quota check checks quotas for users. It's also an administrative command. There's report quota or rep quota to summarize quotas. There's ed quota for edit user quotas. So this is what the admin would be using to modify the quotas for particular users. Then here's some important quota files. There's etc quota tab. Quota tab is a description of file systems for users. So when you run warn quota to email the users that they're over the quota in a certain file system, you also want to give them a little bit more verbose quota than just /home. You want to tell them, well, the home file system is where your home directory is. So that's what quota tab does. Then there's the etc warn_quota.conf file. This is where you configure the message and preferences for the warn quota command. And finally, there's aquota.user and aquota.group. These files are created in the root of each file system, and they control what the quota is for users and for groups in that particular file system. So there's going to be more than one of each of these files if you're using quotas. So now that we learned about quotas, let's move on to our scenario with the Big Sky Fishing Supply Company. At the Big Sky Fishing Supply Company, you've installed the new Linux server. The next thing you need to do to be able to use that server is to create some logins for the users that want to get on and check out the new server. So to do that, I made a list of the tasks that we need to perform. First off, we need to create a user using the user add command line tool for the user Sally Jones. Then we're going to create an account for Fred Smith using the GUI tools, the graphical interface tools. We'll go back and we'll modify Sally's user account, her comment, using the user mod tool. Then we'll create a group using group add called marketing. We'll create a group using the GUI tools called sales. We'll add Sally to the sales group using user mod, and we'll add Fred to the sales group and marketing group using the GUI tools. We'll create a shared folder called sales and set group permissions on sales so that only sales users can get into the folder. We'll log in as both users to make sure that the accounts work, and we'll check to see what group they're in by using the groups command. We'll create a file as each user in the sales folder, verify that the other members in the group can access that file or modify that file, and then we'll make sure that the user Jim cannot get into the sales folder. Then finally, we'll delete the user Jim using user delete. So with that, let's get started with our configuration. I'm going to open a terminal window here by going to Accessories, then Terminal, and I'm going to maximize the terminal window. So first off, let's type man user add so we can explore the different options and configuration settings that we might be able to make with this user add command we're about to use to create Sally Jones' account. So I'm going to press enter and let's look at the file here. We can see the user add says it creates a new user or updates default new user information. So you can create a new user, or there is default information for any new user created with user add, and you can use user add to update those default settings. So in general, the command is user add space the options space the login account, or the new account you're trying to create. So you can use -C for comment. That's typically where you would put the user's full name. You can set their home directory here with the -D. You can set their default group right here with -g. If they're going to be in more than one group, you can specify any additional groups, secondary or supplementary groups, with the -G. Let's see what else you can do here. You can set their password, but it's only the encrypted format that will be accepted. So if you type in a regular password, it's not going to it's going to assume that that's an encrypted format of the regular password and decrypt it, and that decrypted format is the user's password. So you don't know what that's going to be, so that's not going to work. So you don't want to use this password option. What you want to do is create the user, then go back and use the password command to reset their password. You can set the default shell. The default shell is going to be the bash shell, but you can change their shell to whatever you want. And of course, you can manually set their user ID number, or you can take the system default, which starts at 500. The default files that a user gets in their home directory are in the etc directory. These are like default configuration files for their profile and for their X Windows environment. So let's quit out of that. So I'm going to type user add, all one word, S Jones, and press enter. So I just added the new user, Sally Jones. And when I did that, it created a new line in the etc password file. It created her home directory called /home/sjones, and then it copied files from etc into her home directory. And these are mostly hidden configuration files. So let's take a look at the etc password file so we can learn about exactly how her configuration was created. So in the last line of the etc password file, that's where any new entries go, is the S Jones account. And then there's different fields after that. Each of these fields are separated by a colon. So you see here the second field has an X in it. That's normally where the password would have been, but since this system is using etc shadow, any passwords are in the shadow file, and it's not readable by regular users. Those passwords are also encrypted. So the X just means, hey, the password isn't here, it's in the etc shadow file. The next field has her user ID number, 502. That was automatically numbered because the previous entry was 501. Then there's her group. Her group was automatically created. There's a group automatically created called S Jones, and then her group number is 503. Right here between these two colons is the comment field. This user doesn't have a comment right now, but she will later. Then next is her home directory, and then finally her login shell. Next thing we need to do is create a password for Sally so that she can log in. So to do this, I'm going to type PASSWD. That's the password command. And if you just type it like that, you would change the password for whatever user you're logged in as. In our case, that's root. But you can also, after the password command, put in the user that you want to change the password for if you're the root user. So since I'm root, I'm going to change Sally's password. So it says you're changing the password for user S Jones. type in the new Unix password. So I'm going to say phishing 123. It doesn't like it because it's a dictionary word, but that's okay. That's the password I'm going to use. Phishing 123. So it says all authentication tokens updated successfully. So now Sally should be able to log in. So I'm going to clear the screen, and we're done configuring Sally's login. So at this point, I'm going to close out this window, and the GUI tools are located under System, Administration, and then right down here, Users and Groups. Alright, we see here, there's the Sally Jones account that we created, right? It's already showing up in the Users and Group User Manager program because it just pulled this from Etsy Password. That's all it did. So to add Fred Smith, I'm going to click Add User, and we have a little form here that we have to fill out to add Fred Smith using the GUI tools. So I'm going to do F Smith as his username. Full name is Fred Smith. His password is phishing123. He has a default shell already, /bin/bash. That's fine. It says create home directory, and there's his home directory, so it's going to do that for us automatically. That's fine. And then it says create a private group for the user. By default, when you use user add, it creates a private group for the user. So what it does is it creates a user group called F Smith, or whatever the username is. It creates a group by the same name, and it puts that user in that group. So by default, all users are a member of a group with the same group name as their username. Then here you can specify the ID manually if you want to. So I could make this 691 if I want. So the user ID here would be 691. So that's what you do to create a user in the GUI interface. So I'm just going to click OK. And there we go. We created Fred Smith. Notice his user ID is 691. He's a member of the F Smith group. His name's Fred Smith, and he has a home directory. So that was pretty easy too. It took a little bit more time than just the one command that we did back in the command line shell. So I'm going to close this out because our next task is to modify Sally's user account comment using user add. Our next task is to modify Sally Jones' user account using user mod. Notice here where it says full name, this is really the comment. Whoops. Let's put that back how it was. There we go. This is the comment field. Full name is the comment field. And Sally Jones right now doesn't have any comment. So normally you put the full name in here. You could also put the user's location or whatever other information, their employee ID number, whatever it is you need to put in there to uniquely identify them. So right now Sally doesn't have one because when we created her we didn't specify one. So let's go back and modify her user account using user mod. So to do that I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to do user mod -C for comment and put in Sally Jones and then her user account S Jones. And it was that easy. Let's cat out Etsy password, and we see now that Sally Jones has a comment. Her username has a comment field in there. It's her full name, S Jones, or Sally Jones. So that was easy. That was our next task on the list. Now we can move on to create a group using group add, and the group is going to be marketing. So I'm going to clear the screen. So now I'm going to use the group add command to add the new marketing group. Group add space marketing. Press enter and it's that easy. We just added a new group called marketing. So if I cat Etsy group, you can see here's the new marketing group. And by the way, any of the things that you do in Etsy Password and Etsy Marketing through the command line tools or graphical interface can also be done manually. However, there's a few things such as when you create a new user using user add, it copies the Etsy scale files and it creates their home directory and a few other things it might do. You're not going to do those things if you just edit Etsy Password or edit Etsy Group. But still, it can be done, all completely manually just by editing files. So we just created the marketing group using group add. So I'm going to close this out, and now we're going to create the sales group using the graphical tools right here. So if I go to Administration and Users and Groups, if I click on the Groups tab, click on Add Group, type in Sales, and click OK. I just added the sales group. And here's our marketing group. So we have both. We have both groups now. So now we need to add Sally to the marketing group. And we're going to do that using user mod. So to do that, I'm going to go to Applications, Accessories, Terminal. Let's say user mod minus capital G to add her to a supplementary group. We're adding her to a supplementary group because she's already a member of the primary group, which is S. Jones. So she has her own group that she's a primary member of. So the supplementary group is sales, and then her user is S. Jones. So I'm going to press enter there. Now let's cat out Etsy group. And you can see here that S. Jones is now a member of the sales group. So that's good. So we'll close this out. We'll click refresh. And you can see there's S. Jones, a member of the sales group. So next task is to add Fred to the sales and marketing group. So I'm going to double click marketing, go to group users, and scroll down here we'll find Fred. F. Smith right there, Fred Smith. I'll say OK, and there we go. He's a member of the marketing group. So now I'm going to double click the sales group, go to group members, find Fred Smith, and we want to make sure Sally's still a member too. S. Jones, there she is. So I'll say OK, and now they're both members of the sales group. So it's that easy to add them to those groups. Let's click refresh. Everything looks good. I'll close this out. Next step, let's open a command line window. Okay, in this command line window, what we want to do is create a shared folder called Sales and set group permissions on Sales so that only sales users can get into the folder. So to do that, I'm going to do it as root, and that way I can make a shared folder area. We'll put this Sales shared folder underneath that shared folder area, and we'll set up the permissions properly for the group members. That's usually what root does. That's usually the administrator's job. So to do this, I'm going to cd to the root directory. I'm going to make a directory called shared. I'm going to cd into that directory called shared, and I'm going to make a new directory called sales. So inside this shared area, I'll have directories, shared folder areas for each of the different departments in the Big Sky Fishing Company, and then we'll set up permissions accordingly so that they can't get into each other's folders. So let's do an ls-l, and there's our shared directory. Now what you should notice immediately is that it's owned by root and the group is root. And anyone else only has read and execute permissions. So first off, let's change the permissions. We're going to do change mod 770 sales. So that means full access for the user, full access for the group, and no one else has access. So I'll hit up arrow a couple times, and you can see now the permissions are R770 over here. So now let's change the owner, and I'm just going to make Sally the owner of the group so that you're changing the owner to S. Jones for the sales folder. So let's do ls-l. Sure enough, Sally's now the owner. So now let's change the group to the sales group for the sales directory. So if I do ls-l, sure enough, sales is now the group that owns the sales directory, and they have read, write, execute. So we successfully changed the permissions, owner, and group on that folder using change own, change group, and change mod. Now we need to test this out. So let's log in as both of our users, make sure they can both get in there, create a file, and modify someone else's file who's in the same group in that same folder. So I'm going to log off root. So first let's log on as Sally Jones. Password was phishing123. Okay, and of course we could do this from the graphical interface too, but I'm going to go to Applications, Accessories, open a terminal window. I'm going to cd to /shared/sales. Do an ls-l. There's no files in there. I'm going to create a file and call it Sally's shared.txt. Do ls-l. Sure enough, I created a file called Sally's shared.txt. Now, if you look at that file, it's owned by Sally. Group permissions are Sally's group. So we might want to change that file's group, change group, to sales for Sally's shared txt. Now let's do ls-l. And there we go. Sales is the group owner of that, and they have read-write permissions. So let's go ahead and log off Sally. And let's log on Fred. Okay, I'm logging on as Fred. Let's go to Applications, Accessories, open a terminal window, cd into shared sales, ls-l, and there's Sally's shared file right there. Let's edit that file. I'm going to do gedit Sally's shared.txt. Gedit is a graphical text editor. I launched it from the command line. So I'm going to put in here, this was edited by Fred Smith. I'm going to say save. Close this out. Now let's do ls-l. Now it created this. This is a temporary file, is all this is right here. But it did modify the first file there. So let me cat out Sally's shared.txt. Says this was edited by Fred Smith. So there we go. Fred was able to edit Sally's file because Fred is in the sales group. And the file has permissions for the sales group for read and write. So now if we log in as Jim, Jim shouldn't be able to get into this folder at all. So let's log off. Whoops. Log out. There we go. Log out Fred Smith. So now I'm going to log in as Jim. Now let's do this the graphical way. I'm going to go into Computer, File System, find our shared folder, and there's the sales group. I double click on it. It says the folder contents could not be displayed. You do not have the permissions necessary to view the contents of sales. So we can't get in there. If I close that out, and I notice here, look, the sales folder, it has a big red circle with a line through it. So I know I can't get in there. So our permissions do work. We tested them. We know Jim can't get in there. Let's close this out. Let's log back in as root. I'm going to open a command prompt. So here we go. We have a terminal window, and poor Jim. You know, we created Jim when we installed the system. Jim doesn't have access to any groups. He's not a member of anything. Jim's going to be laid off. So they've asked you as administrator to delete Jim. So to delete users from the command line, you do user del or user delete and just put in their name, and there you go. Jim's gone. So if you cat out etc password, no more Jim. You know, a quick way, say you had a really long etc password, would be to cat etc password and grep for Jim. Nope, no Jim. So if you cd into /home, you'll notice Jim's directory still exists. But notice that the user here is no longer Jim. The user is 500. 500 is the user ID for Jim, back when Jim was a user. So this is sort of an orphaned file. It has no owner. It has a group. There's still a group named Jim, which, by the way, we need to get rid of, right? So how do we delete a group? Group del or group delete Jim. Oh, cannot remove user's primary group. Well, let's remove the folder right here with rm minus capital RF, and we'll delete out the folder. Everything in there. The R is for recursive. The F is forced. Do not ask us. There we go. ls minus L, and that's gone. So now let's up arrow a couple more times here to group del Jim. Let's try to delete that group again. Still can't remove it. Cannot remove user's primary group. Well, let's cat out the etc password and see if anyone else's primary group is the Jim group. First, what's the group ID for Jim? So if I cat /etc/group, let's look for Jim. There it is. The group ID for Jim is 500. By the way, a quicker way to do that would be cat etc group and grep Jim, right? We got it real fast. So there's some guy named David, and his primary group is the Jim group. So if we cat etc password, we grep for David, we find that David's primary group, this field right here, the 500, is Jim, the Jim group. Well, that doesn't make sense. We know, let's say that David needs to be in sales. So let's do a user mod -g, lowercase g, to change the primary group. We're going to change the primary group to sales for the user David. Alright. Up arrow a couple times. We're going to cat etc password. We're going to grep for David. There we go. David's primary group now is 506. Sales. So now I can up arrow a few more times and do a group delete on Jim. It's gone. Jim's gone. So if I do an up arrow a few more times and I cat etc group and I grep for Jim, what'd I get? Oh, I got nothing. So we know the Jim group is gone, the Jim user is gone, Jim's home directory is gone. So just a little lesson so that you know, if you do a user delete, it doesn't necessarily clean up everything. It leaves the home directory and it leaves the primary group that it created when it created the user Jim. But that's how you do it. So with that, we're done with our exercises. I'm going to close this out, and let's go back to our slides. So we just completed all these different steps in our scenario at the Blue Crab Food Company. We've set up a couple users, a couple groups, and we're about to conclude this video. So in conclusion, we learned about the etc password file, the different fields in etc password, and the different programs that modify etc password. We learned about the etc shadow file and how the shadow passwords are stored in that file. So the encrypted format of the user's passwords are stored in the shadow file. The etc group file is where all the group definitions are stored. Every user has a unique numbered user ID. Every group has a unique numbered group ID. We learned about the user add command. That's what you use to add users. User mod is used to modify users, modify their comments, their home directory, their shell, and what groups they're members of. We learned about the group add command to add groups, group mod command, user delete, group delete. We learned change owner, change group, and change mod. That's what we did with the sales directory that we created. We changed the owner to sales. We changed the group to sales. And we changed the file modification so that no one else besides the sales group could get in there. We use GUI tools for each one of these as well as the command line so that you can see how each one works. And then we learned a little bit about disk quotas. With that, that's the end of video number 6. Thank you very much.